Rust is a game that people have really strong opinions about. On one hand, you have the people that love it and play it every second they get, while others hate the toxic community or just don't have huge amounts of time to dedicate to the game. Whatever your reason may be, you have to admit that Rust has some really fun mechanics to it. For this list, I've chosen 5 free games that have some similarities to Rust, but don't expect anything that's too similar to Rust's mechanics. Keep in mind that Rust is a very unique paid game, so finding free games like it was extremely difficult. Even though I said that, I already know there will be people in the comments telling me that these games are nothing like Rust. It's hard enough to find paid games that are like Rust, let alone free games. So with that out of the way, here are 5 great free Steam games similar to Rust. Stay Out is an MMORPG where you explore a post-apocalyptic world and complete quests for NPCs. This game doesn't have any of the base building aspects like Rust does, but what it does have going for it is its combat in a Rust-like world. There aren't enemies like Rust scientists or vehicle NPCs around, but you will face off against wildlife like giant rats or rabid dogs. Besides these enemies, you aren't safe from players when out in the world. The main areas are safe zones where there's no PvP allowed, but as soon as you leave, you're at risk of getting attacked. Besides the random PvP encounters you'll have, there's also the option to have clan wars and face off against a lot of enemies at once. Although the player base is small, it's very active and there are always people online. Every time I play it, I always end up running out of ammo and sort of sprinting around aimlessly. From everything else I've seen about the game, there's a lot of fun to be had when you start to get more gear. It's mildly similar to Rust in certain areas, so if you think the game looks fun, then I recommend checking it out. Infestation, the new Z, sounds and feels like a mobile game in certain ways, but it does have a lot going for it. It has both the main survival game mode and a battle royale option. The game feels a lot more like Rust's core mechanics with the looting and combat, though honestly, it's more like DayZ than it is Rust. Around the world, there are tons of NPCs to fight and lots of buildings to explore. The world is pretty large, so you can expect to do a lot of walking, but the loot is very rewarding when you find buildings. The game also features a base building system for you to craft a home to store your loot. I'm not sure if there's raiding in the game, but at least you can build a place to come back to and feel safe. There's a decent crafting selection with lots of gear to find, but the game does feel somewhat buggy sometimes. When I started up the game, my crosshair wasn't working at all, but then it randomly appeared after playing for a bit. Once you get past the wonkiness of the game, it really has a lot of fun content in it that'll keep you coming back for more. You can get a small amount of the risk versus reward looting that Rust has, as well as a fun PvP experience. It'll never fully replace Rust, but for a free game, it gets pretty close. In comparison to the first 2 on this list, Muck seems like a step backwards in terms of Rust similarities, but it's a game that I've been enjoying a lot recently that has some overlapping mechanics. The game is a roguelike, so there's a lot of risk involved in the combat. There is a PvP option, but that's mainly for people who get a lot of friends together in a server. Muck has mechanics such as gathering resources with a rock, smelting, and crafting that seem like they were definitely inspired by either Rust or games like it. In the early game of Muck, you can definitely see how similar it is to Rust as you scramble to craft a decent base and find some gear. As the game goes on, it becomes less and less like Rust and more like a traditional roguelike. That's definitely not a bad thing though, as I think Muck is one of the best free games available, especially if you have some friends to play with. I'm fully aware that Muck and Rust look like 2 different games, but they do have some overlapping mechanics, which is why I put it on this list. The art style is simple but enjoyable to look at, and the gameplay is really fun, so I definitely recommend checking it out. Unturned is one of the most well-known free games available, and it basically is a low-poly version of Rust, but with more zombies. This one probably has been on more of our lists than any other game, and it consistently has a large player count. If you somehow haven't heard about this game, the gameplay is about surviving in a zombie apocalypse against other players. Apparently, this game actually started out on Roblox, but eventually they transitioned it to its own game due to its popularity. The weapon selection, looting, base building, and exploration are all top-notch and could have easily passed for a paid game. The replayability of this game is insane, and it provides one of the best free experiences you can have. If the core gameplay isn't close enough to Rust for you, then you can play on a Rust server that tries to be as close as possible. If all of this looks interesting to you, then I definitely recommend giving Unturned a try. Beached isn't number 1 on this list because it's the best game, but rather it's because it's the closest thing to Rust that I could find. To be honest, I think Unturned is a much better game, but Beached is a straight up clone of Rust in a different art style. When you start the game, even the menu is designed to look like Rust. Most things are exactly the same, such as waking up on a beach, gathering resources with a rock, and finding structures and monuments around the world. I do enjoy this art style a lot, but the game definitely looks and feels like an early access game. I've put Beached on a few lists before, and it's improved quite a bit since then, so the developers are actively improving the game and listening to player feedback. I used to have issues with hitting trees and hitboxes, but it seems like the developers have patched that since. One major downside of Beached is that there aren't a lot of players on the servers, so you're not going to have that same tense gameplay that you would get if you were playing Rust. I actually really hope that this game gets more popular over time, because the game would actually be a lot of fun if there were servers that were larger. Overall, Beached is a diamond in the rough that's quite literally a free-to-play version of Rust. It doesn't get any closer to that, so if you don't mind some early access bugginess, then it's definitely a game you should check out. Rust is the type of game that would take an awful lot of work to replicate, so most of these games are loosely similar to it. Overall, I think most of these could be a decent replacement, though nothing could ever be as polished and immersive as Rust. If there are any games I overlooked, let me know in the comments so I can check them out for future videos. If this video helped you at all, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, we'll see you in the next video.